You're listening to Superflexology, a Superflex-focused fantasy football podcast with your hosts John Bauer and Mitch Sorensen.
Thank you for joining us for another fantastic episode of Superflexology, a proud member of the Full-Time Fantasy Network. This is episode 24, and I'm your host, John Bauer. You can find me on Twitter at The Bauer Club. And of course, I'm joined by Mitch Sorensen, and you can find him on Twitter at DinoMC. So Mitch, week one is in the books. How did you fare?
Decent, man. It wasn't horrible, but I think anybody who ran into the bus of Lamar Jackson or Christian McCaffrey, you're just happy if you could dodge a couple of those bullets. I
noticed that especially some of the deeper leagues that we're in, those are the leagues where some people put up big points, because if you had Sammy Watkins, or even in the 14 or 16 team leagues, you're starting people like John Ross. So those are the leagues that I feel like the people with those huge outliers, they really had an advantage, because I don't know about you, but the smaller redraft leagues, people weren't starting John Ross.
Yeah, exactly. All my 12-team leagues were okay, but the 14 and 16-team ones, if you just ran into Deshaun Jackson at that point, you're kind of done, because you can't make up that 40-point blowout with how thin the 14-team lineups are.
Exactly. And I ran into some tough matchups, and if you didn't have one of the guys that popped off, you probably struggled, like you said. But I'm happy to say that our co-owned teams, the Superflexology Dynasty teams, they did great. They were 3-0 this week. We will provide an update every single week. So don't just think, oh, they're talking about it because they went 3-0. We're going to talk about it every single week. But unfortunately, my redraft and best ball teams, on the other hand, they did not fare too well. Whenever you load up on Devontae Adams, Travis Kelce, Joe Mixon, Sony Michel on multiple rosters, that definitely was not a strong week one performance for my teams. But we're not here to dwell on the past, okay? We had so many topics that we wanted to hit on, and based off of my original show notes, and Mitch, thank God you're here because you always keep me in line, we probably would have been here for a few hours, and listeners probably would have trailed off very quickly. But luckily, we were able to drill down a bit, and we have some great topics lined up, so let's get into it. And I tell you, Mitch, there is a Superflexology curse. I've said it multiple times. But first up on our show notes tonight, because this is our first show since Antonio Brown was signed by the New England Patriots, this is the first chance that we have to discuss them. And I wanted to talk about the impact that Antonio Brown would have on the other players in that roster from a redraft perspective, but obviously the short-term implications, it affects the dynasty output as well and the dynasty values. But man, 15 minutes before we jumped on here, the report came out about Antonio Brown and the accusations. And we're not here to say whether or not it's true or even provide input from that regard. But Mitch, do you think there's any chance that he suits up?
I don't. At this point, with how everything's gone with him the last month and these accusations, I don't see the NFL allowing him on the field until at least some more stuff comes out about it.
Yeah, so like I said, we were going to run through all of the players, the impact that he had on the rest of that roster. I think we can dive into that on a future show at this point. As long as you're okay with it, I'm okay moving forward past the Patriots talk. So let's, again, we always have something that throws a wrench into the show notes. Now, this is going to be something we probably hit on every single week, and that's injuries throughout the league. And there were certainly some big ones this week. Just like we were going to do the Patriots rundown, let's talk about what we're doing with these guys in Dynasty and how the rest of the teams are impacted based on these injuries. So, Mitch, first up, Nick Foles, Superflexology quarterbacks. This is probably the biggest injury from a strictly super flex perspective in week one. One, what are you doing with Nick Foles? And then we'll get into how are the other players affected by this injury.
So with Nick Foles, I actually have him on a fair amount of my dynasty teams, and it sucks because you could get him for super cheap earlier. But I think this makes Minshew right now. He's going to be an instant starter in your deeper leagues. In most of the 12-team leagues, he's going to be available on the waiver wire. And I think you could spend up to 80 to 100% of your fab and just go out there and pick him up.
I did just that tonight, actually. My waivers cleared. I think it was 6 o'clock in a 12-team Superflex league, and I had $897 out of 1,000 left. I threw it all on him, and I was able to acquire him. But even if it's only until week 11, which I think is the initial prognosis here for Nick Foles going on IR, that's when he can return at the earliest. Minshew's somebody that I wanted to acquire, even though it's only a 12-team Superflex league.
Yeah, and he actually, if I remember right, he went 15 or 15 on his first passes. I know they didn't go very far, but I actually kind of like Minshew after watching him, because I was watching Red Zone and then I had the Jaguars game on as well on the other screen. He's not scared. He has a couple pretty funny quotes out there that's like, I don't get scared, so it's not a big deal. I really like him. He's becoming my favorite quarterback now.
So looking at it from a football perspective, Jacksonville, they actually have the 6th easiest schedule when looking at past defense efficiency, and that's from sharpfootballstats.com, and that's from weeks 2 through 10. So the games that Minshew, that he's expected to be the starter. Yes, they just got Josh Dobbs from the Steelers for a 5th round pick, which I think is actually too much for Dobbs, to be honest with you. But I don't think there's any danger in Minshew losing the starting job at this point. And especially the fact that they were able to stay somewhat competitive. Yes, it was against the Chiefs, not the strongest of defenses. But when you look at Minshew and what he did on the field, he had the 2nd lowest intended air yards in week 1. That's the 2nd lowest of all qualifying quarterbacks at 5.5 air yards per attempt. That was actually only above Jimmy Garoppolo. I think there are a lot of opportunities in this offense, especially if you have a quarterback that's looking to get rid of the ball fairly quickly. And he did that. He was kind of right in the middle of the pack whenever you look at the time that he held the ball prior to throwing it. Let's talk about the position players, Mitch. What impact does this injury have? Actually, Nick Foles, real quick. Would you buy him in Dynasty?
Right now, I wouldn't. They paid him a decent amount, but they didn't pay him the elite money, So if Minshew comes in and say they go 7-1 at this point, or 7-2 by the time Foles comes back, you have to wonder with that coaching staff if they're just going to let Minshew play at that point.
If they're playing that well, I can't see a situation that Foles gets back in the lineup. I don't know if they're going to be, 7-1, 7-2, whatever that is. But yeah, if I could get him on the cheap, I definitely, we always say that a player is a buy if you can get them for a certain price, right? And the same thing for a sell. If you can move them for a certain price, they're certainly a sell. But Nick Foles, if I have him, I'm not moving him. I'm just going to throw him my IR, but I might throw some feelers out, especially if I'm in a league where I'm rebuilding. I might, take a dart throw and take a gamble on Foles for the future. So that's what we're doing with Foles and Minshew. Let's get to the position players now. What are your thoughts on Leonard Fournette? Does this impact him in the least?
Yeah, I think they're just going to lean on him even more now. And he looked really good against Kansas City. They had him out. You could tell he was pretty winded, but it was like 95 degrees with 65% humidity in Florida. So this week they're going to go to Houston. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how well he plays on that many snaps, when it's not that kind of a weather condition. But I love Fournette. And even the wide receivers, I like them a lot too. So I'm definitely not selling any of them at this point.
The good thing with Leonard Fournette, we've talked about this throughout the offseason, we expected his target share to increase, especially in between the 20s. And it did just that. He saw 6 targets go his way in week 1. And yes, it's partly due to the fact they played the Chiefs and they had to throw the ball. But we've also talked about the fact that teams cannot stack a box against a running back when they're running out of 11 personnel, right? There's 3 wide receivers on the field. It's a little more spread out, more room to run. They only ran 16 running plays, but 10 of those were out of 11 personnel. And that actually led to Leonard Fournette only facing a stack box right around 15%. So a significant decrease from what we saw even last year. They're going to spread the ball out more than I think we initially expected. So 40 of their 50 plays against the Chiefs were out of 11 personnel. Again, they fell behind early, so maybe that has something to do with it. But I would love to see them continue to run the ball out of 11 personnel. And I think that increases Fournette's value. So you're not selling any of them if you have them. And I completely agree. I know people are going to be out and about and they're going to be trying to buy players on the cheap right now, especially after the week 1 overreaction. Everybody, they want to buy low and sell high, right? So we're not moving any of these players. And I completely agree. Fournette, D.D. Westbrook, those are really, and Raquel Armstead, I have him on the taxi squad in some leagues. What do you think about the rest of the roster? Are any of them worth picking up or buying? In the deeper leagues that we're in, they're all probably rostered, right? Conley, Chark, even your boy Jeff Swaim. Are you attempting to acquire any of them, or do you think the price just isn't going to be worth it?
Yeah, I don't think the price is going to be worth it. There's none of them that I really think are going to be strong flex plays, even Conley and Shark. So they're definitely not people that I'm going to go out and try to look to acquire at this point. And
can we talk about the snap share for both Keelan Cole and Marquise Lee? Both were at 21%.
Yeah, it's Marquise Lee's first time playing as well. So I could actually see that going up a little bit.
And then just really quick, do you think there's any chance that in a closer game when they're not playing the Chiefs, do you think they could go more to 2 wide receiver sets? Or do you think we could see more of the spread out style of offense?
Oh, I definitely think it's going to be more spread out. With their new offensive coordinator in Minnesota, they also ran like a ton of passing plays there. And as soon as he left, Minnesota immediately switched back to, that 12 personnel that we've talked about a lot. And I think the Jaguars are going to be like the early 2018 Vikings, to where they're just going to pass out of that 11 personnel a lot more than what kind of people expected coming in.
And that would definitely be advantageous to not only the receivers, but like we mentioned, Leonard Fournette and Gardner Minshew. And that's probably something that we are going to continue to see. But it's definitely going to be something interesting to monitor and kind of how that impacts the team and what we see moving forward. Moving on next. Now, this is a big one. And it actually, we'll talk about this more in our DFS and Start Sit show this week. But you had Tyreek Hill as a fade last week. And then coincidentally, the injury. So we can't really take a victory lap, but looking at the Tyreek Hill injury, and one interesting part of this is they didn't put him on IR. So if they put him on IR, the earliest that he could have returned, Mitch, right, is week 9, I think, right?
Yes. Yep.
So in my mind, in your mind, and I think in everybody's mind, that's very telling that he's probably going to be back before then. So before we talk about the impact this has on the rest of the team, from a dynasty perspective, are you throwing feelers out to acquire Tyreek Hill? Are you doing it now? Are you going to do it as the season progresses? Or are you just avoiding it altogether?
See, normally I would say go out and buy him. But the problem with Tyreek Hill is all of the people that have him on their team right now are the people that had him when he was having all of his legal issues. And so they either bought him for a really low price, so they're not going to be willing to sell him, or they just stuck with him through that. So there's no way they're going to want to sell him just because of this injury. So normally I would say yes for, 90% of the other wide receivers that would have this going on. But I just don't think anyone's going to be selling Tyreek Hill for any sort of discount.
The only counter I have to that, let's say a team starts off and they're 3 or 4-0, and then something happens to the remaining wide receiver core and they start losing a few games. Maybe there is a chance there to buy low and pounce. But I agree with you for the most part. That's going to be a really tough buy because, like you said, they've held on to him this long through all of the value dips and bumps. I think they're going to want to hang on to him. But just like we talked about other people circling and trying to take advantage of buy low, sell high, this is a player that I'm definitely going to look to acquire potentially maybe week 4 or 5 if I'm out of contention and I have some pieces to move more to a win now team. So that's what we're doing with Tyreek Hill. Let's talk about the remaining wide receivers. Sammy Watkins, who absolutely blew up. He was fantasy player number 1 in week 1. He had his 40-some points. Mecole Hardman, and then Demarcus Robinson. What are your thoughts on that wide receiver core and Tyreek Hill being off the field? How does it impact them?
Definitely don't go out and buy Sammy Watkins right now. The offers that I've just got for him, they're crazy. The one guy who I think is really going to help is Mecole Hardman. With Hardman, though, he played on 53 of 59 snaps and 22 in the slot, and he only got 1 target out of that. That's going to go up just based off being on the field alone. And I think Hardman's definitely someone, if you can, go out there and try to get him for a little cheap, because you're going to have 8 weeks of him playing in the slot in that offense. And I really don't care who it is in that offense. I want to have shares of him. It's why I fell in love with the running back that we talk about all the time. But anyone on that team who's going to be playing a lot of time, I want shares of that player.
Are you willing to pay the inflated price that you're probably going to have to pay at this point?
How high do you think that price would be, though? Because it's definitely not up to a 2021 or 2021. I don't think anyone's going to be asking for that.
I don't know. You've seen the prices on Sammy Watkins. I think just based on Tyreek Hill not being on the field, that perceived value is going to be through the roof, even for Mecole Hardman.
Yeah, that's very true. If I could get him for just in value of a 2022, whether it's a player or something like that, then I would definitely do it. But if I have to go up to a 2021, I'm just not willing to do that at this point, especially with how good those wide receivers that are coming out next year.
Yeah, I think we're on par with each other there. Sammy Watkins, you can't buy him right now. This would be the absolute worst time to buy Sammy Watkins. Mecole Hardman, not quite as bad, but I'm still not buying. I might throw some feelers out, but I'm going to assume that I'm not willing to pay the price that people are going to be looking for. Now, Travis Kelce, you and I have talked about this. A player like Tyreek Hill who can stretch the field, keep the safeties honest, that actually is an advantage to be on the field for a player like Travis Kelce, who's going to eat in the middle of the field. Do you think this has a really negative impact on him? Or do you think still with Hardman and Watkins, they're able to stretch the field enough? And if anything, this actually benefits Kelce?
See, I think you're right that with the first case it is going to hurt Kelce because it's going to put that much more of a target on him each week. People were already going to be double covering him, but now it's going to be more so to where he's the focal point. So I think he could actually get more targets based off this, but I think how successful those targets will be is going to come down.
All right. And then the last person here, well, the last two people, Damian Williams and LaShawn McCoy. So let's talk about the split real quick. This really doesn't have anything to do with Tyreek Hill, but it was kind of what we expected. We saw Damian Williams, it was at least a 2-1. He outsnapped LaShawn McCoy 2-1. And I think that can be a little bit closer moving forward. LaShawn McCoy, it was his first game on the team. When he was in, he pretty much got the ball and it was a run, and he was pretty successful. He was efficient. And Damian Williams saw 66% snap share, McCoy 29. But with a player like Tyreek Hill, I don't want to say a gadget player because he's not just that, but a speedster, do you think this could kind of increase and improve Damian Williams' role within that offense?
Yeah, I think so, especially PPR-wise. Standard leagues, I wouldn't worry about that much, but PPR is going to help him. And I don't know how many people actually watched that Jaguars game, watching the reactions on Twitter, but Damian Williams was on the field whenever it was a meaningful down. Like when they got close to the red zone, Damian was in. When it was third down, Damian was in. And I think that's going to continue. And having no Tyreek Hill on a third down with Damian there to drop it off to, I think it's going to help him out a lot.
There's a chance that in Damian Williams, he saw 6 receptions, I believe, and you hit the nail on the head. PPR, this is going to improve his standing on the team. But there's a chance that we could see between 8 and 10 receptions every week that Tyreek Hill is out. So yeah, maybe he's not the most efficient running back, but it doesn't matter how he gets his points. So for me, Mecole Hardman, he's benefiting from Tyreek Hill being gone. Travis Kelce, you're probably right, Mitch. I think there's going to be an uptick in usage, probably not the quality of targets that we saw, but overall, I'm going to call it a wash. Sammy Watkins, I actually think he's a little negatively impacted here. You're not going to buy him after that week 1 performance. Let him cool off a little bit. If you want to buy him later, it might make sense whenever Tyreek Hill's ready to come back. At that point, he's probably going to cool off a little bit. LaShawn McCoy, I don't think this really has any impact on him. I think they're still going to run out of the 3 wide receiver sets. We're going to see the 11 personnel. They only had 5 pass attempts that weren't in 3 wide receiver sets, and a good amount of their runs, they come from the 11 personnel. So can you see this really having an impact on LaShawn McCoy in negative or positive light?
I think just the more time he's going to have with the Chiefs, he's going to get a little bit more play. So I think it's going to help him, but I don't think the Tyreek Hill injury is one way or the other for him.
No, and as big of a Damian Williams proponent that you've been, Mitch, throughout this whole offseason, you've talked about this, and I agree. I think that split and that timeshare gets a little bit closer. I don't think we're going to see Damian Williams with 66% snaps. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't think we're going to see as big of a gap between Damian and LaShawn McCoy going forward. I actually think we can see a few more 2 running back sets, and maybe Damian Williams gets split out wide. He has that ability to catch the ball. We've seen it. So I think that gap closes in terms of snaps on the field. That's going to benefit McCoy naturally. But like you said, I don't think it's because Tyreek Hill's missing time. So that's how we see the situation playing out with the Chiefs, how we're valuing them, what we're doing. It's really I'm not changing my values in terms of dynasty. I'm not going out and buying any of them. If I have Sammy Watkins, and I think I have 1 share, I am absolutely going to be shopping him. And I think everybody, you're doing yourself an injustice if you're not shopping Sammy Watkins after that week 1 performance. This next one, Tevin Coleman, he saw 19 snaps out of the 68. He went down fairly early. And I actually didn't know this at first. And I have him on a few rosters. And I saw his points just stay the same. And I was a little worried. And then I saw that he was injured. So, Mitch, quick rundown. What impact do you think this has on the rest of the 49ers? Well, and again, before we get there, are you going to buy Tevin Coleman at all? Or you can't, same thing, you're not going to sell him?
No, I'm not going to go out and try to buy him now either, because you brought this up brought this up pre-show, but Breida can just take over the field at this point. And maybe when Coleman comes back, maybe he's the third guy behind Mostert. But Breida is a top 20 running back from here on out until Coleman comes back. Without a shadow of a doubt, he's in every single one of your lineups if he's on your team. But the only issue is he's not a pillar of health himself. You need to go out, you need to see if Mostert's out there on waivers. And if he is, you need to spend a good amount to pick him up right now.
I completely agree with that. And my only concern with Matt Breida is his health. But I, of course, agree with you on this. If I have him on my team, I'm playing him. It's kind of like an Austin Eckler type situation. These guys are going to have their chance to shine. We saw Matt Breida do it last year at times. He was fantastic. And Mostert, you should be looking to put a waiver claim if he's available. Any of the other players, I don't think this really has a significant impact on them. What do you think?
No, I don't think. I mean, do we want to bring up Pettis? This doesn't have anything to do with them, but dude, that could be my biggest miss of this whole offseason is Pettis. He only got 2 snaps this whole last week.
Yeah, let's talk about this real quick. And it kind of, like you said, it really has nothing to do with the Tevin Coleman situation. But is this more of Shanahan's motivational tactics? Or what is going on here?
That's what I thought it was until I saw it was 2 snaps. If it was 15, I'd be like, all right, he's just in the doghouse. Getting 2 snaps is like, you're not going to even see the field. So he must have done something to this point to piss off Shanahan.
Yeah, something. And we saw it last year, and we're already seeing it again. So I'm looking at the snap shares here. Deebo Samuel, 60 out of 68. Goodwin, 50. Richie James, 26. Kendrick Bourne, 17. Pettis, 2. Last year, they actually ran the least amount of plays out of 11 personnel. And I honestly just thought it was because they had no wide receivers available, right? Nobody really could stay healthy. It doesn't seem to be the situation. It just doesn't seem like Shanahan wants to run that type of offense. And we've preached this so many times. If you run out of that 3 wide receiver set, it spreads the defense. It's advantageous to your running backs. But it seems like they want to run 12 personnel a little bit more, or, they're just staying away from the 3 wide receiver sets. And Mitch, you brought this up in a league chat. George Kittle has a chance. I know we didn't see it on the stat sheet because of some plays that were called back. I think George Kittle has a chance to be the tight end 1, and everybody knows how high I am on Travis Kelce.
Yeah, we see a lot of wide receiver ones. They have plays ran for them. If anyone watched that San Francisco game, the only person on San Francisco that had a play ran for them was Kittle, and they do it over and over and over. If I had to put my money on someone right now being the tight end 1, it would be Kittle, because it's definitely not Ertz out this last week.
Yeah, that was kind of a rough showing, and I think we're going to get into that a little bit later. But George Kittle, just somebody that I'm really excited about. And we saw 10 targets in week 1, and then he had 2 touchdowns called back because of stupid penalties by the offensive line. But not related to Tevin Coleman missing time. George Kittle, fantastic opportunity to be the tight end 1 this year, which shouldn't be shocking. It's not like he's coming out of nowhere. But the only impact that we really see Tevin Coleman having, Matt Breida going to have a chance to shine. Mostert, he better make the most of his opportunity. And the wide receiver core not really impacted by this. Tevin Coleman, Tyreek Hill, he's going to have a role when he comes back. Nick Foles most likely is going to have a role when he comes back, unless they go 7-1, 8-0 in his absence. There's a good chance that Tevin Coleman might be playing second fiddle to Matt Breida when he comes back, and that's definitely a concern. So I agree with you, Mitch. I am not buying Tevin Coleman, even though there is going to be a nice buy low opportunity here. Now, this next running back we want to bring up, man, there have been a lot of big time injuries with a lot of fantasy implications. And this one hit me hard and often. I have him on a lot of rosters. Joe Mixon. Mitch, what are your thoughts here? What impact does this have kind of just on the roster as a whole?
So I think it's huge for Gio because we haven't had a chance to talk about him since he got that contract extension. But he was going in August, he was going about running back 52. And I think most of that was he was going to be an unrestricted free agent after this year. But now he's going to be with the Bengals. And I think that we should immediately move him up to, in the 30s, right around that Drake, Jordan Howard level of running back, because he was already getting work when Mixon was on the field. And then when Mixon went down, Gio was the only running back that got a touch for the rest of the game. And so he's not even a normal handcuff guy. He's going to have standalone value as it is. So It's going to be really hard to buy Gio right now. But since Mixon's only week to week, when Mixon comes back here in a couple weeks, I'm definitely going to be putting out some feelers to try to get Gio on my team. And then the wide receivers, I think.
But before we move on, Mitch, if you're strong at running back, especially in a 12-team league where you have a little more depth, would you possibly be looking to shop Gio right now?
I would look to shop him, definitely. But even if I have strong running backs right now, if Mixon misses this week, I want Gio to play. And so that's kind of, I know we're talking dynasty-wise, whether we should move him or not, but he can help your team get a win this week too. So if you can wait 1 week to move him, and then Mixon comes back the following week, so his touches drop down a little bit, I would rather moving him next week than this week.
And that's a great point. Of course, we're talking about dynasty values, but we're 1 week into the season. How many players have you heard discussed so far where even their dynasty values have drastically changed? We're 1 week in. So yes, we're talking about dynasty, but again, we always say these short-term implications play a crucial role in dynasty. So Mitch, that's a really good point. Hang on to Gio just in case Mixon misses this week. He's going to pop off. He's going to be using that offense. Then maybe look to sell him. Or like you said, I think it's a really good point. Maybe look to buy him once Mixon comes back, because like we talk about all these running backs, Mixon doesn't have a clean bill of health.
Yeah, and Gio is going to have what Malcolm Brown has right now. They have that standalone value to where even if Mixon is there, you could still play him in the flex on some really, when bye weeks happen, you have some injuries going on.
Right. So let's go to the wide receivers. Does this have any impact?
I don't think so. I don't think it affects them that much.
During the offseason, we did a show and we talked about teams with new coaches or new offensive coordinators. And of course, Taylor going over to Cincinnati. One of the big questions that we had, were they going to run 11 personnel like they did in, I want to say St. Louis, but Los Angeles? And they actually had 56 pass attempts this last week against the Seahawks. 41 of them were with 3 wide receivers on the field. Boyd was on the field for 79% of the plays, Ross 82, Willis 90. That is really telling, especially in a game that wasn't exactly high scoring. Yeah, Mixon went down early, but I would love to see this team stick with that offensive philosophy and use those 3 wide receivers in the field. AJ Green, when he comes back, that's going to help players like Mixon and Bernard. And we actually saw a decent split between the 2 tight ends there, Eifert and Uzomah. But yeah, I think the wide receivers, they're pretty much set in stone. This really isn't changing their value. If anything, maybe they throw a little bit more, but I don't think this is going to directly impact their perceived value. And you really shouldn't be seeing a bump one way or the other. But I think that was really good information on Gio Bernard. Definitely look to shop him after this next week, especially if Mixon misses time. But once Mixon comes back, see if you can get Gio for that reduced price, because most likely somebody might be willing to move him once Mixon comes back. We have one more injury to get through, and this one, it's just from a more personal standpoint. Darius Geis, it seems like he just can't catch a break. And you saw all the things he did during the offseason, and you don't really hear anything bad about this kid, even though during the draft he slipped because he had character concerns, but I don't know how true that is. But man, he can't stay healthy. So we're seeing a knee injury, but it's the other knee. It's not the one that he injured last year. So Mitch, I think some of these are obvious, but let's talk about it. What impact does it have on the rest of the running backs here?
Adrian Peterson's going to be starting now, so that's good. He'll actually be on the active roster. But if you have Adrian Peterson on your bench, we saw what he did last year, and there's no reason why he can't come close to that again. So if you have Adrian Peterson, you got to be happy with him. I don't think you could really go out and acquire him, because I don't even know what he'd pay at this point. You can't really pay a 2022nd. I don't think anyone's going to move him for a 2023rd. So he's just kind of one to where if you have him, you're happy, and if you don't, you just kind of going to see what happens with it.
Now, I think this kind of has a bigger impact on somebody like Chris Thompson, because we know that Adrian Peterson is not all that involved in the passing game, and we kind of assume that Darius Geis would be. So do you think this gives maybe not a dynasty bump, but at least for the next 4 to 6 weeks, if Geis misses that much time, do you think he's going to be used more if he's healthy himself?
I do. I actually like Chris Thompson a lot. I think he got 7 or 8 targets this past game. And I think he's going to continue to see that, because they're going to be in really bad game scripts. So he's going to be on the field quite a bit. And we know he's going to get all the 2-minute work. So he's definitely someone that I'd be okay going out there and acquiring.
So you're okay buying Chris Thompson. Are you moving him if you have him? Or is it more like if you have Thompson and Peterson, you're just hanging on to them?
I'm just going to hang on to him. Yeah.
Now, the wide receiver core, we saw 2 wide receivers hit over 90%. That's Quinn and McLaurin. Do you think this has any impact on that? Or do you just think the fact that we're going to see a lot of negative game scripts, that's just going to be beneficial enough for these wide receivers?
Yeah, exactly like you just said. They're going to be passing a lot. And Case Keenum actually looked really good. And if he's the starting quarterback for the next, 10, 11 weeks, these guys are pretty good. And if you could go out, McLaurin's going to be really hard to buy right now because first off, he's a rookie, so we know his price is already pretty high to begin with. And he just had a huge week. But getting Trey Quinn would be a decent idea right now. I think he's still cheap enough to where you could go out and get him. And I wouldn't want to do a 1-for-1 deal with him, but if you could have him included in a package, I think that'd be a really smart way to go out and acquire him.
That's a good point for a lot of these players. They're very difficult just to move a pick or a player in a 1-for-1 deal. But if you could get a player like Chris Thompson thrown in, Adrian Peterson, if you're one running back away, or you just need that really short stopgap. Let's say you have a let's say you have a Joe Mixon or somebody that might miss a little bit of time. An Adrian Peterson type player might be the guy that can just hold you over until then. And I think that's a really good point on Trey Quinn. McLaurin, he's not going to be a guy that you're getting as a throw-in. You're probably going to have to pay up for him. And Paul Richardson, he's a guy that could be thrown in. I don't think really anybody's too gaga over him. But that's kind of it. They're all tough situations because we try to put these value changes in Dynasty, and 1 week here, 1 week there, that could change all of it. So we just wanted to discuss a few of the injuries and what we're doing with those players and the players around them. And Mitch, before we move on to our next segment here, Darius Geis, are you buying or are you just trying to stay clear of him at this point?
I've stayed clear this offseason. It's not because I don't like his talent. It was more because I didn't like how bad I thought the Redskins were going to be, even though they looked a little bit better week 1. But he's someone I just didn't have a lot of to begin with.
And I have a few shares. I'm just going to sit on him. There's no point even trying to move him. So hopefully that information is useful from a dynasty perspective. And again, some of these injuries, they're not really that long term, but we're certainly still going to see some value changes. So moving on, and hopefully those injury segments can get shorter and shorter as the season goes on. We don't want to spend a lot of time on injuries just because that means there's going to be a lot of injuries and most likely impacting each and every one of our rosters. So with this next segment, Mitch, and I think this is going to be something that's going to be really good to do on a weekly basis, again, because we see things change so quickly. Mitch, who is a player that you believe will take a dynasty value hit based on what we saw from week 1 because of what it could have been the usage, it could have been the performance, but you see that trend continuing?
So mine's going to go back to that Thursday night game, and it's Geronimo Allison. And it has nothing to do with the skill set. I thought it actually looked pretty good out there. The Packers use a lot of that 12 personnel, which we see a lot of offenses moving to now. So in 2018, they ran out of the 11 personnel 76% of the time. Last week, it was down to 50%, and they were up to 33% of the time in 12 personnel. I know those are just numbers, but what it means is if they're in 12 personnel, Geronimo Allison isn't on the field. They have the 2 tight ends out there with Jimmy Graham and Mercedes Lewis, and Geronimo's on the bench. And I think in just neutral and positive game script games, which I think the Packers are going to be in a fair amount this year, I just don't see Allison being on the field at that time. The funny thing is we had a bet, it was probably 3 or 4 months ago on who we thought would get the most fantasy points, MVS or Allison. And at the time, I was thinking MVS was going to be the slot guy and Allison was going to be on the outside. And you thought Allison was going to be the slot guy, which he ends up being. And so I made that bet thinking that, no, MVS is going to take over the slot. We always want the slot guy in Aaron Rodgers' offenses. And lo and behold, it just turns out that MVS is going to be on the field the majority of the time, and Allison's going to be the slot guy who's going to be hurt by their new personnel packages.
It's a very bittersweet moment for me. As people remember, I was on the Allison train, and while I did think he was going to be the slot receiver, I didn't think they were going to transition to the 12 personnel as much as we saw in week 1. Yes, there was the concern with Matt LaFleur and what we saw in Tennessee, but I didn't think it was going to be this drastic of a change from what we saw last year in kind of a more Aaron Rodgers-led offense than maybe what we saw in week 1 against the Bears. I'm not completely out on Geronimo Allison quite yet. Still was on the field for 50% of the snaps, but I do tend to agree with you, Mitch. I think MVS is the guy moving forward. He saw, 6 or 7 targets, and I think he's a guy. Aaron Rodgers is one of those quarterbacks that if he trusts you, he's going to continue to get you the ball. And I say guys like Aaron Rodgers, Ben Roethlisberger, they're all kind of those old school guys. If you have their trust, they're going to want to get you the ball. And MVS seems to be that guy. And again, looking at my dynasty shares, I actually had more MVS than Geronimo Allison, and I actually have a few rosters where I have both because they were both so cheap. I don't know if the Allison shares are going to pay off quite the way I expected, but hopefully MVS, at least one of them can pop. We don't want to see them cannibalize each other, but it's a trend that unfortunately I think we are going to continue to see. Now, with that said, Mitch, are you selling Geronimo Allison if you do have him?
I'm kind of lucky because I don't have any, but if I did, I would try to sell them now before people realize what's going on. I think a lot of people could just look and see that they played Chicago last week. Super tough defense to play against, so maybe they're going to try to buy him low and hope that he pops off. So if I was going to try to sell him, I'd try to sell him now because, I mean, even Jimmy Graham and Mercedes Lewis, they were both on the field for more than Allison was.
Yes, they were.
And that's something I just want to stay away from. And a lot of people don't look at snap counts and stuff. So I would definitely put out some feelers, try to mix Allison in a package and try to see if you could get someone else.
That's the way to do it. It's either a package deal to acquire somebody or just sit on him because it's going to be really tough to sell him for one piece. Are you trying to buy MVS based on the splits that we saw?
Yeah, but it's going to be super hard to get him. And almost everyone in our leagues knows that I want him already. And so I'm not going to be able to get him even if I want to. But anybody else out there, I would definitely try to get MVS. He missed almost a full quarter of action and still had, the 7 or 8 targets. And he was still on the field for a lot of plays even after missing that full quarter.
I hate to concede to you, Mitch, but in this one, I'm not ready to wave the white flag just yet. But I think I'm going to have to get it ready and hold it in my hand, and we'll see how things play out in the near future. I'm going to be really quick with the guy that I want to bring up in this situation, and I think it's really obvious once I say his name, Kerryon Johnson. So we wanted to believe, we really did, from the bottom of our hearts, that Matt Patricia was going to use the best player in that backfield, right? He barely saw, 58% snap share, something like that. CJ Anderson was still used. We did not see a lot of 11 personnel. And I know we keep bringing that up, but it's very important to know that there really is a direct correlation between 11 personnel and how many stack boxes you're seeing. If you go to NFL Next Gen Stats, they have a really great website and you can see, it's a great resource. You can see the amount of stack boxes that these players went up against in every week. The top 2 running backs with the highest stack box percentage was Kerryon Johnson, just behind CJ Anderson. That tells you a lot about the way this team is going to run their offense, especially with Hawkinson. With what we saw, he's going to be on the field a lot. Jesse James to help that line, he's going to be on the field a lot. We're going to see a lot of 12 personnel. That's something that is not going to be beneficial for a player like Kerryon Johnson. And I think even more alarming, we thought he was going to be involved in the passing game, in a game that they threw the ball a lot. Matthew Stafford had a great day. Kerryon Johnson had 2 receptions, so we really didn't see a bump in value there. If I can get anything close to his previous value, where he was going in startups, I would love to get that in return right now. I would love to get off of the Kerryon train. If people aren't willing to pay that price, I would sell for a slight discount because the situation really does worry me, but I'm not going to take a huge hit, and I'm certainly not going out and buying Kerryon Johnson. And we're going to have a little segment later where we talk about guys that we shouldn't be buying low. I could have included Kerryon Johnson in that segment as well. Mitch, do you have anything additional that you want to add there? I know he's your hometown boy and, the Detroit love that you have.
I love Kerryon Johnson, but that coaching staff is so bad. Right after the game, Matt Patricia came out and he said he didn't like how many plays were ran and he's hoping to slow it down in the future. Dude, you just played the Arizona Cardinals. Of course you played a lot of snaps. The defense was super tired. The offensive coordinator completely blew it by calling a timeout. And I mean, it was awfully coached football, which is something that we should just expect for the next probably 2 years with Detroit. Dude, everyone knows I love Kerryon going into this year, but at this point, you're right. He's only going to get 55% of the snaps, and you're just going to have to pray for a touchdown each week.
And he is losing goal line work, even though Actually, I can't even really make that statement. We saw it in the preseason, but he had one carry inside the 20. I think it was one, and it wasn't inside the 10, so they really weren't in there because they were throwing the ball a lot. Just somebody that I want to avoid from this point forward. Do you have anybody else that you think is going to take a dynasty value hit and the trend from week one continues?
No, my next one's definitely going to be a dynasty gain.
So who is that?
So that's going to be Derrick Henry. I was really, really worried about that defense going into the season. And I mean, the Titans were going to be my pick to get blown out by the Browns, which I think the majority of people saw that. But that defense is really good. And maybe Baker isn't as good as we thought he is. I mean, I don't know. Just throwing that out there.
You were waiting so long to get that jab in. Awesome. You were waiting so long. Anyway, continue.
I hate Baker. But,
I know. Keep going.
But so that defense just flat out showed up. And Derrick Henry got 36 snaps. And on those 36 snaps, he got 20 touches, 160 yards, and 2 scores. Now, he's not going to get 160 yards, but we know he's going to get all the goal line work. And he's going to get the majority of the rushing carries. And with the defense looking as good as it was, and they're also missing Taylor Lewan on the offensive line because he's out for that suspension. So the offensive line's going to get better. Man, I just love Derrick Henry now. When he was someone I was actually trying to sell going into the year, Derrick Henry's someone I'm going to be trying to pick up this next week.
Just like we've talked about on multiple players, that might be a tough one because at this point, the people that have him are truthers. And I know I have him in a few leagues, actually. And I tend to agree with you on this one, as I typically do. This is a trend that I think is going to continue. That defense, and maybe it was just the growing pains that we saw from the Browns, but I do tend to believe that defense in Tennessee, they have something there. And if they're able to have a positive game script or even be somewhat close, he's going to be used. And that's one of the reasons I like Marlon Mack. I don't want to bring that up, but I thought he was going to be used this season, even in a slightly negative game script. And he had 25 rushing attempts. I think Derrick Henry is going to be that same boat. I think they're going to run him into the ground this year, especially on a contract year. I do think they sign him, right? They haven't extended him yet, right?
Nope.
So I think they do. But if he can stay healthy, he is in line for a huge workload. And in the past, he has stayed healthy. So I do agree with you there, Mitch. I think he's a great guy to go out. Even though you might have to pay a little bit more now, that production is going to be, the usage is going to be maintained throughout the season. Who is a player that you believe right now has a buy low window or a nice sell high window based on week one, and you don't believe the trend continues?
It's going to be Alshon. So there's a lot of people who will just look at the box scores and, it's hard to watch every game and keep up to date and everything. But Alshon, he had 5 catches for 50 yards, which isn't big, but all the highlights were of him there was a carry in the red zone that he got from the 2, and then he got another touchdown as well through the air. And so he got 80% of the total snaps, which is kind of what we expect. But what we didn't expect is for Arcega-Whiteside to only get 6.7% of the snaps. And they pretty much do the exact same thing on the field. And I think Arcega-Whiteside is going to be getting more and more reps as the season continues. And that's going to directly affect Alshon. And so right now, after Alshon has a really big game and he's getting that red zone usage, now is a time I would try to move him. Because I think Arcega-Whiteside is going to take that over within, if it's not this year, it'll definitely be by, September of next year.
Especially if you're in a rebuild and you have a few of these aging veterans left on your roster, this would be the time to sell Alshon. I agree to an extent with the Arcega-Whiteside take, but I still think it's crazy that Ertz was, I don't want to say he was shut out, but he really didn't produce the way many expected. And teams might start game planning to take away Alshon, and that starts to open up the middle of the field. So maybe Ertz sees a little higher target share, especially in the red zone, and that's going to directly impact a player like Alshon. I think that's a great guy to sell high on now. Even in Dynasty, you're going to be able to move him to a contender, especially if the contender has a player like Tyreek Hill, who now needs a wide receiver. I have 2 guys that I want to hit on very quickly in this category. And for me, there are 2 guys that I would like to buy. One, Mike Evans. People are very worried about that offense, and that stems from Jameis Winston. They don't know if this offense is really going to be what it was supposed to be. And Jameis Winston looked really, really bad in that week 1 performance. The 49ers defense might just be a little bit better than we expected. We talk about Shanahan being such a smart coach. I really think they just game planned and really went in and accomplished what they wanted to do. They put a lot of pressure on Jameis and they got to him, and it was a negative game script. And we know that Winston doesn't really perform well in those situations, which is you want your franchise quarterback to do. I know it sounds silly to say it, but for me, Mike Evans is a buy. And Chris Godwin, I was going to throw him in there too. But again, just because of the box score chasers, he had a touchdown. He was somewhat productive. You're not going to be able to buy him. Those truthers are really, really adamant. And Mike Evans, he's somebody that I think is going to lose a little bit of perceived value even in Dynasty, and I'm definitely going to try to throw some feelers out. My other one, and it was going to tie in with our Antonio Brown talk, but again, we really don't even want to talk about that because we don't know what's going to happen. But Sony Michel, he was held to 14 yards on 15 carries. He didn't have any targets. If he was in the game, you pretty much knew it was a rushing attempt. If you watch the game, a lot of his rushing attempts came in more compact schemes and personnel packages. So you weren't seeing the spread out plays like we did with James White and Rex Burkhead, and those guys were able to run in space. But when Sony Michel was in the game, the Steelers really did. They stacked the box. That's going to change moving forward, especially if Antonio Brown does play eventually. But still, then you have Philip Dorsett, who saw the field a lot, and they're going to run 3 wide receiver sets. I just want to see Sony Michel run the ball with those 3 wide receiver sets. It's going to open things up. Teams aren't going to stack the box because that's what the Steelers did a lot. And we heard about Sony Michel being the target for more passing opportunities in the preseason. He didn't get 1 target. So that's something you're going to find a lot of frustrated owners. If you want to buy Sony Michel, do it now. Up next, they have Miami. I don't want to make any promises, but he should drop at least 20. I would like to see between 25 and 30 fantasy points, but that is something that's definitely reasonable. So for me, I'm trying to buy Sony Michel and Mike Evans, especially if the owners are down on him. And Mitch, you're selling Alshon Jeffrey after that monster week 1 performance. Now, we talk about the overreactions. And on Monday, I sent out the message to our group chat, Mitch, and I said, who's ready for Manic Monday? And everybody, it was overreaction. So who is a guy that while they didn't perform in week 1 for one reason or another, whatever that is, they would look to be a great buy low candidate, but you're not buying quite yet?
The one guy that I was going to bring up on this is Robbie Anderson. And I wish I could remember who had the tweet, but someone out there had a really good tweet about all the cornerbacks that he has to face this year. And he plays the elite of the elite guys who are just going to be shadowing Robbie Anderson. So he was a little bit of a fade for me to begin with. He didn't do a lot week 1. And we saw how much Sam Darnold loves to throw to the slot. And Sam Darnold was the exact same last year. Jameson Crowder had, 17 targets? Is that right?
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, so he had 17 targets, didn't break 100 yards, of course. I've actually seen some people out there saying, go out there and buy Robbie Anderson. And I worry that he's just not going to be able to have enough of a floor for you to be able to start him each week, because he's definitely going to have a ceiling games where he goes out there and he has, the Deshaun Jackson type of games where he has 4 catches for 150 yards and 2 scores, because it's going to happen at some point during the season. But you're going to have to be able to pick out those weeks when it happens with Robbie Anderson. I don't want to be the guy to have to pick those weeks.
And I don't even know. For me personally, I do like Robbie Anderson. I like his skill a lot. And I know you do too, because we talked about it in the offseason. But that schedule is daunting. And his value, I can't see it going up before it goes down. So he might be a buy candidate later in the season to really head into the offseason with. But this year, in a lot of the leagues that I have him, because of where I was able to get him, because we had a lot of startups early in the offseason, he's not even starting for me. And I was able to keep him on my bench. So he's probably somebody that I'm going to be comfortable with keeping. But if you're looking to go out and target him, I would say hold off just a little bit, see what's happening, because I think his value is going to go a little bit lower. And the 2 guys that I want to bring up that I think eventually are going to be a great buy low candidate, but wait just a little bit. People had to spend a first-round draft pick on this guy, Davante Adams. I love Davante Adams. Go buy him prior to week 4. So week 1, they face the Bears. They have the Vikings next. Then even though it might not be the defense that we expected, the Denver Broncos, the Raiders had success against them this week, but they're going to get a lot of pressure on Aaron Rodgers. I can't see Davante Adams. He's going to be okay. He's going to get 12 to 15 points, but I don't think he's really going to pop quite yet. So maybe between week 3 and 4, that's when you want to target him, because the owner that took him in the first round might be getting a little bit frustrated, but that schedule gets significantly easier week 4 and beyond. And it's kind of a similar situation with my other guy, Devontae Freeman. Vikings, Eagles, Colts, Titans. We just talked about the Titans defense. The Colts defense, I think they really didn't show it in week 1 against the Chargers, but they're a strong defense. The Vikings, they shut down Devontae Freeman in week 1. The Eagles, they're probably going to cause some issues as well in week 2. But after week 4, if you're a contender, make a move for Devontae Freeman. Again, I think the owner is going to be frustrated. And this is a situation that if the owner isn't a win now team, they might be okay moving for draft picks or a prospect. So those are the two guys. And with Robbie Anderson as well. Robbie Anderson, Devontae Adams, Devontae Freeman. I think they're going to be great buy low candidates sometime in the near future, maybe Anderson a little bit later. But right now, do not try to acquire them because their perceived value at least, might take a little bit of a hit. I'm hoping everybody had a fantastic week 1, and we're already gearing up for week 2. And it's going to be a blast. And I'm hoping the information that we provided with the injuries and the different buckets of the categories that we had, guys not to buy low on yet, and then guys where we think the trend continues and where things from week 1 might have been a mirage and we don't see it moving forward. But I'm hoping this is valuable information. And even though it's the short term, from a dynasty perspective, it can be very, very useful. As always, thank you so much for tuning into Superflexology. I'm John Bauer. You can find me on Twitter at The Bauer Club. For Mitch Sorensen at DynoMC. And then follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Superflexology. Have a fantastic night.
Thank you for listening to the Superflexology podcast. If you want the latest news in fantasy football, follow us on Twitter at Superflexology, The Bauer Club, and DynoMC.